Hi chess friends, welcome to my new series, an unbeatable repertoire for black against 1d4. In this series, I will be presenting to you a solid and reliable repertoire against 1d4. My recommendation is to meet d4 with the classical response d5, taking equal space in the center. So white plays d4, black goes d5, the response to the queen's gambit move to c4. My recommendation is the move c6. So c4, challenging the d5 pawn, we solidify with the move c6. My aim is not to play a pure Slav, but to reach a Semi Slav via the Slav move order. Reason being to keep flexibility and not to reveal our intentions too early to white, because if white missteps, we may be able to use this small detail playing c6 over the semi-Slav move e6 to gain a more promising position. Going back, we should understand the c4 pawn is not actually free. Let's go back one move, as it can be easily recaptured. Let's take a look. D takes c4. This simple variation, by no means the best variation, shows how white can simply regain their pawn. Queen a4 check when black blocks. Then queen takes c4. Taking stock of the position, black exchanges their central pawn, the pawn that was on d5, for a wing pawn that was on c4, and this should give white some gain. White now has a central majority and now has a clear central edge. This is why we bolster the center. Some might wonder, why not defend the center with pieces? Let's go back to the move c4. Knight f6. This develops a piece, guards the center. But what could be wrong with this move? But in this case, white achieves their aim. They neutralize our central space with the move c takes d. And if we recapture, now they take full control over the center with tempi if they move e4. The knight must now flee the center, and if we look at what has occurred, white gains space in the center. Our d pawn was eliminated by the c pawn, so white exchanged their wing pawn for a central pawn, which in essence is a strategic gain, and white has full domination in the center of the board, as these pawns take away squares from our pieces. The knight can no longer use d5, and white's pieces now are able to develop freely. Going back to the move 2c6 for black. What if white develops classically with knight f3? We continue knight f6, going along with classical development. If white continues knight c3, we play the move e6. White e6 and not simply developing the bishop first before we block this c8 h3 diagonal. Here the move e6 hampers the bishop, but let's see what happens if bishop f5 is played. So we play bishop f5. Now, one of the main drawbacks of bishop f5 is it weakens the light squares, especially the point on b7. So white exploits this by playing first c takes d. We recapture c takes d, equalizing the space in the center, and the move queen b3, hitting b7, but also targeting the d5 pawn. Now, queen d7, a natural looking response, simply guarding b7, is met with the strong move e4. Point being, let's say if d takes e4, then the move bishop b5, and we get in trouble on the light squares. Going back, if I have to move e4, let's say if bishop takes, then knight e5, the queen goes to c7, bishop b5, or even the move bishop f4 is possible. and we're in all kinds of mess. Knight takes, same resulting position. Knight takes, bishop takes, knight e5, and this move bishop b5. As we can see, pawn structure is connected. The trade on d5 weakened the king along the e8, a4 diagonal. And white always has this resource, bishop b5, to exploit. This is why we simply, going back, we simply play the move e6. This bishop will be developed later. For now, we're just getting our development on, kingside development, probably developing the bishop on f8. And in time, we will solve the problem of what is known as the bad bishop in the Semi Slav structure, bishop on c8. It is bad because the pawns are in the same color as the bishop, and the bishop is now restricted. So after the move e6, white has many ways to continue. One of the main classical lines is the move bishop g5. h6 is one move. Knight b d7 is another. Some people go for an exchange on d5. Queen c2 is also popular. e3, now guarding the c4 pawn, as one of black's strategic ideas on the last move was actually to take on c4. We'll discuss this later. Bishop f4, not a very good move, but played mainly at the lower levels, are somewhat of a Catalan with the move g3. We will look at all of these options in time. Enough of the theoretical overview. Let's look at some example games. Our first game comes from Vikenze 2013. Levon Nawornin versus Vishwanathan Anand. We have d4, d5, c4, c6. Anand uses the Slav move order. Knight f3, knight f6. All of this we have seen before. Knight c3. And the move e6. White goes for the Maran variation with the move e3, guarding the c4 pawn. As now the diagonal is opened. Knight b d7, black stays flexible. Bishop d3. Here, black takes the opportunity to capture on c4 under favorable terms. D takes c. Now, black gives up the center, but gains an extra tempo. As now, the bishop from d3 has to move again, and black plays e5. The idea being, black is trying to solve the bad bishop on c8 by bringing it to the long diagonal with the move bishop b7, and eventually setting it free when it gets to b7 with the move c5. We'll see how the game proceeds. Bishop d3, black plays the move bishop d6. Not playing bishop b7 immediately, we will get to the reasons why later. Bishop d6, white castles, black castles, queen c2, taking aim at the h7 square, and also looking at black's c6 weakness. Black goes bishop b7 now. White plays a3, ruling out possibilities of b4, dislodging the knight. Rook c8. The aim is to prepare c5 to bring this dormant bishop to life. White goes for the throat with knight g5. There's a tactic that exists here with the move bishop takes h2. king takes, and knight g4. And black is able to take back on g5. The position is approximately equal. In this game, black went for more dynamic possibilities. Black sacrifices a pawn on a7 by playing the move c5, achieving the strategic aim by opening the bishop on b7. If we take note, we can see that black has these great bishops pointing towards white's king's side, and white has many pieces stuck on the queen's side. Hence, the king's side is where black will have the initiative. In this game, white played the move knight takes h2. Black went for the kill with knight g4. The best move here is h3. Knight takes f8 is no good because after either bishop takes h2 followed by queen h4, or the even more beautiful version queen h4. If h3 is played, then the queen sacrifice leading to mate. So white blocked the diagonal with the move f4. f4, although it solves the short-term problem, leaves the structure somewhat vulnerable, as now the e3 pawn is not guarded anymore, and the diagonal to the king is slightly weakened. As pawn structure is connected, what black does first is to first soften up the structure with c takes d4, and plays the brilliant move bishop c5. What happens if d takes c5? Knight recaptures, and there are all sorts of problems. Queen d4 with some mating ideas. Queen takes d3, and black's position springs to life. Knight f8, you can easily see a variation like this occurring. h3, queen d4. And in this position, knight g4. Going back, although this may have objectively been the best variation without the inclusion of the move bishop d2, which is a clear blunder, but black keeps an advantage here as white can't develop any of the queen's side, and the initiative goes on. If we go back, after the brilliant move bishop c5, if knight takes f8, then bishop d4, queen h4, the game is over. What if bishop c5? There's nothing else white can try. Game was the move bishop e2, just trying to get rid of some of the pieces around the king's side. But black plays another brilliant move, solidifying the knight. Knight e5. None of the pieces can be taken by the d4. If there's a capture on c5, this is forced mate, a beautiful smothered mate. Knight f2, rotates f2 is one way. If king g1, then you know this pattern. And there's a brilliant mate. So rotates f2 must be played, but this will still lead to mate shortly. Now g2 is a problem, and there's only desperados because competitor moves would be like c6, giving material, or knight f6, but there's problems on the king's side, as g2 will fall with me. What if taken on e5? That's f takes e5, then queen takes d4, and queen g1, another smarter mate. So none of the pieces can be taken. In the game, bishop takes g4, which is best, was played. Bishop takes d4 first, was inserted. The king went to h1, now the recapture on g4. And we see all the pieces are starting to coordinate against white's king side. And let's not forget that white has all their pieces stranded, and we have these raking bishops. A knight close. White is in serious trouble. Knight f8 was played, and the hope was that black plays foolish and rushes in with the move queen h4. So queen h7 would save the day, trading queens for white. But Anand is a former world champion and an experienced grandmaster. He played the move f5, simply cutting out the resource queen h7. And now queen h4 is still on the agenda. Knight g6, attempting to save the knight and also guard the h4 square from the queen, but this knight is very unstable and will be kicked around. With the move queen f6, queen d3 was an idea to hit the bishop, because if queen takes g6 then queen takes d4, but this version does not work. Knight e3, a very brilliant move, just hitting g2, as g2 is the focal point and main target. If rook f2, then bishop takes g2, and this is mate. If h3, hitting the knight, then queen takes g6. This knight can't be taken, because if h takes, then the queen just needs to move along the h file to save square, either h7 or h6, and the game is over. So game was queen e2, but let's look at any other version. Queen d3, just simply trying to guard the h3 point, hit the bishop, because the reason for guarding the h3 point is that the move queen h5 always comes with the threat of taking on h3, because the bishop on b7 pins the pawn that guards the g2 pawn that guards h3. Let's go. Knight f2, rotates f2, and now queen g3. The simple idea, just attacking the h3 point. Any other variations that make sense? Okay, queen e2. This attacks g4, also hits e6, but queen h5, queen d3, trying to guard. Rook f3 was also possible, but knight f2. And although white manages to make it to endgame after the move knight d3, this position is hopeless. Everything is falling on the queen side. So what else? Queen d3, bishop e3, simply cutting the connection of the queen to the h3 point. A very beautiful game by Anand. At this point, Ronan threw in the towel. I called it a day. White resigned. Our next model game is the game Gelfand Magnus from London 2013. This game did not originate from the standard Queen's Gambit move order, but was reached by transposition through the Nimzo. Gelfand started with 1 d4, Magnus replied knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, Magnus played d5, transposing back into the Queen's Gambit, knight c3, knight b d7, bishop g5, c6, e3. Had we gone through our standard move order, let's go back, we would have reached the same position via 1 d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, e6, bishop g5, knight b d7, e3. And we would have the same exact position. On the move e3, Magnus played the move queen a5, entering the Cambridge Springs variation. The idea of this move is on White's last move, he played the move e3, which cut the bishop from g5 from defending the dark squares on the queen side. So a typical idea would be play queen a5 to pressure knight on c3, bishop b4, the e4, and black is setting an emotional attack along the dark squares. Against this, Gelfand replied c takes d5, releasing some tension from the center. Black replied knight takes d5, rook c1, guarding c3. Black took on c3, White recaptured, and then the move bishop a3, gaining time and development. Rook c2, b6. Black here is solving the problem of the light square bishop, as this is the bad bishop in the structure, by trying to get it to a6, where it would be exchanged for the good bishop of White's structure, its counterpart on f1. So bishop d3, bishop a6, Black achieves their strategic aim, castle, bishop takes d3, queen takes d3, and Black completes development by castling. White takes the opportunity to gain space in the center with the move e4, as White has a pawn majority in the center, as White has 2 pawns on the central files. Meanwhile, Black is missing the d pawn, or fe8. This move aims to help Black to prepare moves like e5, and also allow the bishop to come back to f8, where it might need to play some defense. This game, White went e5, gaining more space, but the structure loses flexibility. And if we take note, these pawns are on the dark square complex, restricting White's bishop somewhat. We'll see how this factor becomes important as the game proceeds. h6, just kicking the bishop away. Bishop h4, and Black strikes at White's central structure. Knight d2. What Black does now is to trade off part of White's center, and then goes rook c8. Now, White has more space, but for Black wants to turn this space into overextension. Space gives the side that has it more mobility of the pieces. So what Black is trying to do is neutralize the space by trades. So rook c8, contesting the c file. White goes knight c4, forking 2 pieces. But Black defends tactically with the move queen b5, creating a pin. So what happens? The knight can actually take on a3 because the queen will be lost. And if queen takes, then rook takes is quite possible. There's no time to take on a7 yet, as the rook hangs on c2. And if after, let's say, queen takes, rook takes c4, White decides to trade first, queen takes, there's no time to actually take on a7, as we can just take on d4, keeping the whole position guarded. The knight on d7 is guarded, the pawn on b6 is guarded, and we managed to neutralize White's space. So going back, after the move queen b5, White guards the center with f4, but this also creates some weaknesses, especially along diagonal a7 g1 to the king, and also it puts a pawn on a dark square, further restricting the bishop. So let's go rook c7, preparing to double rooks on the file. Now White takes the time to grab on a3, rook takes c4, and we get similar variations. Taking on a7 can be met with queen takes d4. Let's go. Queen takes a7, bishop f2 and queen d5. And the ideas are shown by the arrow. The move that is coming now is rook a8 followed by rook takes a2, and black is quite fine. So this is why white does not go pawn grabbing. So after queen takes c4, white guards the center with bishop f2. Black simply retreats with the move queen c7, guarding the a7 point. Rook c1, gaining the c file. But this activity is temporary. White simply goes to b7, queen d6, seeking active play. Maybe some point rook c7 might become possible, but black simply solves the problems by placing the knight on f8. If white goes aggressive with the move rook c7, the queen just goes to a6, and with ideas of actually taking this pawn on a2, because the back rank is somewhat weak, as the move bishop f2 block the king's left from coming to f2. So now the king is stuck on the back rank, and there is back rank weakness. So sample variation, queen c6, black can just take on a2. White has no time to capture on e8 because of queen b1. So going forward, white just simply solves some problems with g3, giving the king some air. Rook c8, neutralizing the rook on c1, inducing more trades, and there's a general knowledge among strong players. It has to deal with the percentages. Any person that knows about math will know, if we count the pieces here, white has 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. And we said the bishop on f2 is the bad bishop because it is restricted by its own structure. So that means 1 out of white's 4 pieces is bad. Now, if we were supposed to eliminate 3 pieces that were fairly well placed, the king, the queen, and the rook, and just leave the bishop, that means white's whole position would be bad. It was 1 out of 4 pieces that was bad, but if there's only 1 piece on the board, 1 out of 1, that means that is 100% of white's position would be bad. So trades help black as it brings the percentages in black's favor. Black is trying to make white's position entirely bad by trading down. So the active rook on c1 is being traded. White takes the opportunity to play d5, taking a pawn off the dark square and trying to improve the bishop, and also getting rid of the weakness on d4. If white did nothing, black would try to trade with the move d7, or blockade with the move queen b7, intended to probably go to d5. Queen d7, and then there's more trades happening, and then black would have been gaining as white is losing their active pieces and progressively making the position a whole lot worse because of the percentages I previously discussed. d5, e takes, queen takes d5. This is still highlighting the problem with the dark square bishop for white. g6, making a luff for the king and preventing f5. Because white has a pawn majority on the king's side, which is very difficult to set in motion, as the queen on c8 does a very good job of nailing down the structure, as h3 can't be pushed, g4 can't be pushed, f5 can't be pushed, as all of the squares along the diagonal is controlled by the queen. Meanwhile, this majority on the queen's side is very deadly, and Magnus shows how it is used best. King g2, knight e6, simply improve the knight, queen f3, king g7, still some improvements before pushing the pawns on the queen's side. These are long-term static advantages on the queen's side, and we must not rush when we have static advantages. We take away all of the opponent's counterplay and win the game. a3, h5, placing the pawns on the right color squares. Meanwhile, keeping white structure at bay, because if you put the pawns on the light squares, then white's pawns are nailed down to the dark squares. h4. Here I don't like this move, as it gives up the fight. It places the pawn on the dark square. Maybe white should have gone h3 g4. Move queen c4, defending tactically, because any g4 leaves the f4 pawn hanging. And if we go back, a more dynamic try, instead of h3 g4, f5 just simply runs into knight g5, f6, king h7. Looks well and good for white that they get a few checks, but when his smoke clears, then queen h3, king g1, maybe they move queen f5, then the bishop really is not doing anything, and we have the strongest coordination with the knight and the queen. The knight and the queen works best. One of the strongest coordinations in chess is the knight and the queen, as the knight, especially when it's in close vicinity, can work on both color complexes, both the light square complex and the dark square complex. Meanwhile, a bishop can only work on one complex. So this is one of the strongest pairs in chess. General knowledge to keep in mind. So let's go back to the move h4, queen c2, still keeping an eye on the f5 square, pinning the bishop, and the queen remains more active. Queen b7, queen a4, simply defending a7 and targeting the a3 pawn. Queen f3, b5. Finally, the majority is set in motion. f5, white goes for dynamic play, but Magnus sees all of this and evaluates it and just says, this position, although the black's kingside structure has been cracked, there will be no coordination here. This position is not dangerous at all for black. Once there's no coordination, black's position is quite fine. The h5 pawn carries no weight to the game, as it is the queenside majority that will decide this game. So queen takes a3. Now the a3 pawn is gone. These are connected passers on the queen side. Queen takes h5, a5. The pawns start to run. Queen g4, white gets in a couple checks. King f8, h5. Okay, so this pawn looks like it's about to run, but Magnus deals with this very efficiently. Queen c1, stopping the h6 pawn in its tracks and preventing bishop e3. Queen e4, preparing some checks along the back rank, and also bishop e3. Before the pawns run, Magnus realizes this is not dangerous. Bishop e3, queen c7, maybe a check, but when the smoke clears, this bishop h6 check is leading to nothing. So queen a8, king g7, h6, king h7, the king blockades the h pawn very well. Queen e4 check, few more spite checks, king g8, queen a8, hoping for a perpetual, but Magnus deals with this. Everything is covered with the move queen d8. After the trade, now we see the majority is running. The h6 pawn will not get the h7, and these pawns on the queen side will decide the game. Let's see how Magnus does it. King f3, a4, the pawns start to run. King e4, knight c6. This keeps white tied to the e5 pawn. White can't run and try to snuff out black's queen side because the e5 pawn will drop, and so white goes bishop c1, knight a5, just helping to prepare the majority. Bishop d2, b3, can't take the knight because black will be saying good night to white. So let's see, the game proceed. King d3, knight c4, still the knight is untouchable, and black is just preparing the march b2, b1, queen. Bishop c3, stopping b2, and if you stop b2, we prepare b2, g4, king h7 for good measure, g5, king g6, and it's what's going. White has no moves. Bishop d4, b2. b2 finally comes. King c2, and the amazing move, knight d2. Just saying, I will play b1 equals queen. And at this point, Gelfand had had enough, as you can't prevent b1 equals queen. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to pass them on in the comments below. I will be happy to answer any questions. If you like the video or found it informative, do not forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you.